Now let's get started building our final product, which is our business card of sorts, but in an app. Now you can see that the layout naturally goes from top to bottom. So the most appropriate layout widget that we're going to be using is of course a column. And inside our column, we'll have maybe something that can display an image in a circle, a bit of text that shows our name, a little bit about what we do, and then maybe a horizontal line to separate this top part with the bottom part, which are these two sort of material cards, if you will, that show our phone number and our contact details. Let's get started making this using what we've just learned. So I'm going to delete everything from the end of the row, where it says here with that comment, all the way to the start of the row. And instead, I'm going to have a column. Now, my column, of course, needs to have that children parameter. And now I get to specify what children I want inside my column. The first child is going to be something called a circle avatar. And you can see that if you hover on this and wait for it, it'll show you the quick docs. And it tells you that if you choose this one, you will get a circle that represents a user, typically used with a user profile image, and the image will be cropped to have a circle shape. So even though we're not really building a profile, in this case, it still makes sense to use this widget so that we get our image automatically filled into a circle. And there's lots of these widgets that the Flutter team have created for common use cases, such as building out a user profile or whatever it may be. And we're going to explore some of those already in this module. What are the sort of things that we can put in a circle avatar? Well, if you click on the circle avatar, and if you're on a Mac, if you hit Control J, or if you're on Windows, you hit Control Q, you'll end up with the quick docs. Now, the quick docs will show you what are all the things that you can set about this circle avatar, including its background color, its child, so something it contains, a background image or a foreground color, or the radius. We're going to keep ours really simple. We're going to give it a radius, and it's just going to be 50. So this is going to show up just as a simple circle with the default blue color. Now, the next thing we're going to change about it is I don't like it being blue. So what if I wanted to specify a color? So let's give it a background color of, I don't know, let's say red. So I can change all of these properties that I discover through using my quick docs, and depending on what it is that you want to set for the radius or the image, then you can customize your widgets like so. Instead of having a background color, as a challenge, I want you to figure out how you can add a picture of yourself or an image that you find on the internet, and you're going to set up your assets to be able to display that image inside the circle avatar. So through the use of quick docs and what you've learned before, try and complete this challenge and see if you can turn it into a circle like this with your own custom picture. All right, I hope you gave that a go and you remembered how to do it. But here on my desktop, I've got a picture of myself, and I'm going to rename it to make my life a little bit easier later on, so I don't have to type out all of that when I try to add my picture to my code. So I'm just going to call it Angela, and I'm going to keep the extension. In this case, the picture is actually a JPEG. Then I'm going to go into my Flutter project, and I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm going to call this images. So now I'm going to drag and drop my image into the images folder, and then click OK when I get prompted. At this point, because we got our project off of GitHub, it asks us whether we want to track the changes that we're making to this project. And you can go ahead and click yes. Here we've got our image, and it's now inside our project under a folder called images. This is the perfect time to go into our pubspec.yaml and clean up a lot of these comments, and then we can go ahead and add in the parts that we need. So remember, the comments start with a £sign or a hashtag, if you will, and try to not accidentally delete parts that are not comments like the SDK, because otherwise you might end up with some problems. So I'm also going to delete all of this, but I'm going to go ahead and add my image asset in here. So I'm going to select all of that, and I'm going to hold down Command or Control and hit the / button. Now, remember that our YAML file is really delicate about how we indent it. So the assets has to be on the same line as the user's material design because it's a child of our Flutter settings. And then the image that we want is going to be indented by 2 spaces. So you can hit the spacebar twice or hit the tab button if you want to. Now, inside our images folder, I've got an image called angela.jpg. Now yours might be called something else. And then we're going to run packages.get to add those images to our project. So now we're ready to change our circle avatar. Instead of having a background color, we're going to have a background image instead. And our image is going to be an asset image. And the name of the image is, of course, images/angela.jpg. Let's hit save, and we should see our image show up in our little circle avatar here. Brilliant. Did you manage to get that right? If you have any trouble with the asset image and also understanding how the pubspec.yaml works, be sure to review the lesson where we talked all about how to import images into our project assets, where we go into that in more detail. Now that we've set up our circle avatar, the next step is to add our name to our business card, right? And so I'm going to add a text widget. And the text it's going to contain is simply going to be my name. At this stage, you can see that the text shows up in the default layout. So it's just a piece of black text in the default font. It'll just be a piece of small text that's in black that shows up in our column underneath the previous child. Now, what if we wanted to style it up a little bit? What if we wanted to customize the styling of our text? Well, we can take a look at the piece of text, hit Ctrl-J or Ctrl-Q, and see what other things that we can change about it. Well, we can change the data that goes in. So in our case, it's Angela U. We can change the style of it. Wait, that seems like what we want, right? So we have to set a property called style, and it's going to be of type text style. So let's try that. Let's add the style property. And let's change it to a text style. Now, what kind of things can we do with text style? Well, Android Studio is very helpful in pointing out we can set the color, the font size, the font weight, font style, letter spacing, all of these things. And let's start by changing the font size. And I'm going to change it to a 40-point font. And I'm going to hit save so we can see what it looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Size-wise, and then I'm going to change the color. I want it to be a white color. So let's write colors.white to get our material palette and change it to white. Yeah, it's looking instantly better. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it bold. So I'm going to write font weight, and I'm going to write font weight dot bold. And now let's hit save, and you can see that we now have a bolded piece of text that's going to represent our name. Now, the only difference between how it looks in our project and how we want it to ultimately look is that this is a different font. So how can we incorporate our custom fonts into our project rather than just using the system default fonts? Well, to find out about that, you'll have to head over to the next lesson. Now, in the original mockup of our design, we wanted to have a nice fancy font for the part where we display our name. Now, how do we add a custom font to our project? Well, the first part is, of course, downloading and getting hold of a font. And the easiest way of doing that is simply heading to fonts.google.com. And the reason why is because all of these fonts here are free for commercial use. So no matter where you're using it on a website or of course in your Flutter app, you can use it without fear that somebody will come after you because of copywriting. So now you get to look through all of these fonts, around 900 of them, and decide which one do I like? What looks nice to me? Or if you're more of a designer and you know exactly what kind of category you're looking for, say a display type of font, then you can uncheck all the other ones and find the one that you want. Now, the one that I'm going to use is something called Pacifico. And this is a font that looks a bit like handwriting. And it looks really pretty, especially when it's contrasted with a normal sort of sans serif font. So this is exactly what we're going to do. And in order to download it, we're going to select this font and we're going to hit the download button. Now we have a zip file. And once you unzip it, then you can see that here's the font, the TTF file format. And here is the license that allows you to use it for commercial use. In order to add this to our project, we're going to do a little bit more dragging and dropping. Again, inside my project, I'm going to create a new directory called fonts. And here, if I have more than one font, I'm going to drop them all in here. So I'm going to drag my Pacifico and drop it into fonts and hit OK. And we're going to add the file to Git as well. And you can see that in the preview, it shows us what this font looks like. And it looks pretty beautiful. And we're going to use it to reformat our font for our text widget here. So again, we have to go into our pubspec.yaml, and in addition to assets, we're also going to have some fonts. Now, previously, before we deleted all the comments, you might remember that there was a comment about how to add custom fonts. And they even point you towards a part of the documentation where it talks about how to use custom fonts. So if you head over to this address, then you can see that it takes you to this page that tells you all about how you can use custom fonts in your project. And we've already imported our font files. So now all we have to do is declare the font in the pubspec.yaml. And the reason why I'm taking you over here is because the YAML file indentation is super important and it's really easy to get it wrong. So instead, what I recommend is just to simply copy all the parts that you need. We've already got the part that says Flutter because we already have some assets in it. And then we're going to hit copy and we're going to go back and we're going to paste it right underneath here. So now you can see our fonts is indented by 2 spaces from our Flutter settings. And then inside our fonts, we've got our font family and we've got our fonts and we've got our font asset. So now all we need to do is to change the family to the name of our font family, which in this case is Pacifico. And then we're going to change the location of our asset, which is inside a folder called fonts, and it's called pacifico-regular.ttf. So I can change this word, Pacifico, and that's all we need to do. And this is more of a foolproof way of getting our fonts loaded up into our project. And when we run package.get, you should see that everything in here is black and white. But if we had an indentation issue, then when we run this, you might get some errors like this, telling you that this part here where it says fonts, it's not what it expected. So indentation matters a lot. And the easiest way of getting this right is to actually just copy it from the source. This makes it so much less error prone. So now that we've got our Pacifico font loaded into our project, from now on, we can refer to it by this name that we specify here. So the Pacifico font family. So let's go back into our main.dart. And for the style property of our text, we're going to also update its font family. And here we can specify the name that we typed into the pubspec file, which was Pacifico with a capital P. And now that I've added in our new resource, we actually have to rebuild our project from cold. So I have to hit stop and then hit play so that it links up all the necessary things that we need. And you can see that our new font gets added in and it looks great. It looks a lot better than the default font that we had to begin with. So now, as a challenge, I want you to apply what you just learned and create the next part of our user interface, which is a piece of text still in our column that describes your role. So it could be Flutter developer, project manager, product manager, designer, whatever it may be. But you're going to make it all caps, and you're going to change the font to something called Source Sans Pro. And you can find it on Google Fonts. Try and pause the video and apply those changes so that we can update the next part of our business card. All right, so we're just going to do exactly what we did previously. We're going to add our Source Sans Pro to our selection, and then we're going to download it so that we have access to it locally. And then we're going to unzip that file. Once you've extracted it and you can see all the different types, we're actually just going to drag in the Source Sans Pro regular, and we're going to drop it into our fonts folder. And then we're going to click OK to move it, and we'll be able to see an excerpt of what it looks like. So now we can go into our pubspec.yaml, and we can copy what we did for the Pacifico font family, and we can paste it right below, but at the same indentation level where the family is. So now, essentially what we're saying is that for the custom fonts that we want to use in our Flutter app, there are two families. One is Pacifico and the other is going to be Source Sans Pro. And we can change the asset location to Source Sans Pro -regular and just check to make sure it's the same spelling. And now if we go ahead and click on packages.get, we'll be able to pull in those files to use in our main.dot. Right below our previous text widget, we're going to add our next text widget. And this one is simply going to say your job title. So it could be, I don't know, Flutter developer, or it could be designer, whatever it may be. And then we're going to set the style to a text style that uses the font family that we named just now, which was called Source Sans Pro. And it's really important that this part has to match exactly what you wrote here. So including all the spaces and the upper and lower casing. So you're essentially referring to something inside the fonts with a family name of Source Sans Pro, and by linking it up previously, we already told it that this is where that font resides and where it should look to. Now that we've added in our font family, the rest of it, it's really up to you how you want to style it. Personally, for me, I'm going to change the color to a light teal. So I'm going to go into colors, and then I'm going to go into teal, and then I'm going to specify maybe the 100 shade. Now, you might have noticed that there's lots of ways that you can do this. So when I write teal and my little dock pops up, you can see that there's teal from 50 all the way down to 900. And that's kind of the dark or deepness of the shade. But instead of adding in the square brackets, I can also just write a dot and specify my shade. As in, if I want shade 100, then I can just simply do that. So this is what we've got so far. And the font's a little bit too small for my eyes. I think I'm getting a bit old. Can't actually see it that well. So I'm going to increase the font size to maybe a 20-point size. And I'm also going to change something called letter spacing. So this property will determine how much space there is between each of the letters in the word. And I'm going to say maybe 2.5. So a lot of these things you can have a play around with it and see how it looks to you. I think one last thing that I would do to this is I would probably make the font weight bold. And that will probably make it look just how I would like it. The styling is of course up to you, but this lesson is all about making sure that you've understood how to incorporate custom fonts into your Flutter app and how we can use the pubspec to specify what our font is called and where it is located inside our project, and then using packages.get to grab it. Now, if you had any problems with indentation, be sure to take a look at this file over here and just notice that every single indent is actually 2 spaces, and it's 2 spaces from the left, and it's 2 spaces for every child. Now, this is really important. So if you have any errors when you run it, this is the first thing to check. I'll include this file as a download for this lesson, just in case you mess up all the indentations and you just want a quick way of fixing it. In the next lesson, we're going to be looking at how we can add icons that are ready made and ready to go into our app. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.